Hello, I'm Professor David Dunning from the Psychology Department here to introduce, with great pleasure, tonight's speaker, Phoebe C. Ellsworth, Phoebe C. Ellsworth, the Frank Murphy Distinguished Professor Emerita of Law and Psychology and Faculty Associate of the ISR Research Center for Group Dynamics at the University of Michigan. Now, Phoebe has a long and distinguished career. She got her undergraduate degree from Radcliffe College and then her PhD from Stanford, taught at Yale and at Stanford before coming here in 1987, teaching both in the law school and at Michigan during her time here. The best way to put it is just to say that Phoebe is remarkable in that she's made foundational contributions in two different areas in psychology and law, and in the study of emotion. In psychology and law, she was one of the earliest researchers to make landmark contributions in that area, looking at how death penalty attitudes influence the quality of jury deliberation and the jury's verdict. And her contribution continues today, and I forgot to confirm this. Are you still working with the Death Penalty Information Center? Are you the president of their board? She is listed on their website as the president of their board. They're a nonprofit that offers data and information about death penalty in the United States. Not content only to make one series of landmark contributions, she's also made foundational contributions in the study of emotion. Looking at how emotions portray themselves in the human face, and also tracing how our thoughts and emotions track one another in systematic ways. Both these contributions have been cited thousands of times in the psychological literature and beyond. Her honors include a fellowship in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. I have to talk fast, there are too many of these things. Career Contribution Award and Legacy Award, and the Nality and Body Award for Mentoring Excellence from the Society of Personality and Social Psychology. The Raymond D. Fowler Award for Outstanding Contributions for Student Professional Development and Science Mentoring Award from the Association for Psychological Science. The Society for Experimental Social Psychology Distinguished Scientist Award. I'm going to stop there, but what I did do was include all the awards that are for mentoring. There are many, many others that I could have stated. The reasons I dwelled on the mentoring award is that I had the honor and the privilege of having Phoebe teach me both inside and outside the classroom in graduate school. And it's a joy, Phoebe, to have known you in that lifetime and to still be around you in this one. I'm not going to deprive you of having her around in this lifetime anymore. Let me introduce Phoebe Ellsworth to talk about how our thoughts and our feelings affect each other, theories of human emotion. Phoebe.
Thank you. We really didn't need all those prizes. Today I'm going to talk about the development of the way people have thought about emotions in psychology. You would think that if you were asked what do psychologists study, that would be one of the first things that would come to mind. But psychologists did not actually catch on that quickly. It didn't really become a topic of research until the middle of the 20th century. And instead, in the 19th century, basically the ideas about emotion were, emotion and reason, is that emotion was evolved much sooner than reason. Reason, animals have emotion, but reason certainly doesn't exist before humans, and emotion continues to be very much behind reason. This is true also in individual emotions. So little kids have lots of emotions, and it takes a long while for them to develop reason. So reason is also more mature than emotion. And the main role of relation between emotion and thought, I mean, the first thing is that they're entirely separate systems, that there's thought, and then somewhere down below, there's emotion. And emotion sometimes sort of interferes from down below and disrupts thought. And that's what the main relationship was. This was the ideas of the 19th century, but they're not entirely absent from 20th century and 21st century thinking. Emotion is more physical emotion. You have trembling, you have racing heartbeat. Thought, nothing physical about that. That is purely mental. Finally, those who did write about it would say, here's where you look if you want to find examples of emotion. Women, children, and what they used to call in the 19th century primitive people, which means not us. And they're all more emotional. You can see more emotions in them. They feel more emotions, and by implication, have less reason than civilized white men. And the idea sort of was, nobody quite said this, but the implication was, as we continue to evolve, we evolve more and more towards pure reason. And someday, in the golden paradise of the future, there won't be any emotion, and we'll all be completely rational beings. Some of this attitude still is around today. It won't strike you as completely foreign. For example, there's a whole field of emotion regulation, which is very big in psychology. You don't have a field of thought regulation, although you might do well to have one. Okay, but it was generally neglected as a topic of research, except, of course, by clinical people studying mental illness. They could talk about emotions, and clearly it wasn't very healthy. But otherwise, it was not much of a topic of research, even though two of the great minds of the 19th century focused pretty strongly on emotion. And the first one is, you all probably won't recognize this. This is Charles Darwin. You probably usually see the picture of Old Man Genius, which is pretty much identical to Old Man Genius Leonardo da Vinci. But I thought I'd remind you that people actually were thinking for quite a while before they became old. He wrote a book called The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals, in which he talked about the continuity of emotion between animals and men, especially in expression. So you have the cringing dog and the cringing person, the growling dog and the aggressive person. It was part of his general theory about evolution from lower species to higher species. But it was definitely not a bestseller, compared to anything else he wrote. So if you haven't heard of it, it's because even at the time, few people had heard of it. Okay, the other major figure was, this is William James, who also was not always old with a beard. And I don't think he wore these duds very often, but he really was trying to look very cool. He wrote about the importance of physiological feedback to the experience of emotion. So he's famous for a paragraph in which he says what happens is you see a bear, you start trembling, and when you notice that trembling, that is the feeling of fear. So the physiological response comes first. And so physical was a big aspect of his theory. It was, in fact, a fascinating, elaborate, interesting theory, but what he was remembered for was basically that sentence, which oversimplified his thought by quite a lot. Okay, but none of this, neither Darwin nor James, actually led to much in the way of research. For the whole first half of the 20th century, there was very little research on emotion, despite these fairly stimulating ideas. And the reason was behaviorism, that starting at the beginning of the 20th century, people believed that you shouldn't study emotion or even thought because you couldn't see them. You couldn't look inside the brain and know what was going on. And the only way to be really scientific was to only study things that you could actually observe. And that left behavior. So you could put the rat in a maze, put a reward in another part of the maze, observe how long it took the rat to find the reward on the first try, on the second try, on the third try. And you could get very good, clear, quantitative data. And that seemed like real science. Obviously, it left out. It was just regarded as a waste of time to try to figure out what was going on in the rat's brain or the human's brain, even though you could actually talk to humans in a way you couldn't with rats, because it would basically be guesswork, fantasy, whatever. Okay. Around the middle of the 20th century, people finally admitted that they were really sick of this and began to study cognition. Emotion wasn't very big yet, but we could talk about memory had been a little earlier, but how people thought and reasoned, and particularly mistakes in thinking and reasoning. So that took off as a topic. Not quite yet emotion, but emotion soon followed. And by the 1980s, emotion was the hot topic in psychology, one of the hot topics in psychology. And we have now several journals which are just about emotion. And so the period that many people considered sort of a desert is over. Current theories of emotion have a couple of things in common. First of all, they're adaptive. They're not the sort of disruptive force that they were considered in the 19th century. And second of all, just about everybody agrees that emotions have many components to them, many different features. Okay, so adaptiveness, as I say, is totally different from what was thought in the 19th century. And basically, the idea is that you need emotions because the organism doesn't just need to understand its situation or its environment, but it's got to do something. It's got to respond appropriately. So if you just sat there thinking about, oh, here comes the bear and it's walking pretty slowly and so forth, the important adaptive thing to do is not going to happen. So emotions motivate behavior, and that is probably the fundamental function that they play in life. They're also, evolutionary psychology was also getting to be a prime interest at this time, and emotions are involved in most of the mechanisms that enhance fitness. So mate selection, hard to imagine without emotions, and most species show a preference for protecting their own kin, particularly people. I won't erase that part about most species. There's an awful lot of species. Okay, so emotions, in a sense, are good for the species, not a problem. And the second thing people agree on is that emotions have many components. First of all, there's just appraisal of your environment, looking around, figuring out what's happening and what matters to you. They also do have physiological responses. Heart rate goes up or down, pupils get bigger or smaller, trembling, a la William James. And they have characteristic subjective feelings, which is what we all know about, that anger feels very different from fear. Many emotions also have characteristic expressions, both bodily expressions like cringing, and the part that's been most studied is facial expressions, and the idea that each emotion has a recognizable face that goes with it. That's not going to work for all emotions. I mean, if you try to say, what is the facial expression of love, for example, you'll get people just making sort of dumb-looking faces, and I think there is no characteristic. But you could also say, well, there's 50,000 different kinds of love, so duh, of course there isn't. And then finally, action tendencies, that the component is this motivation to do something. It's not an action itself that if you have, for example, you're feeling anger and you have your motivation to attack, you're going to, you might not attack depending on how large and powerful the person who's angered you is, for example. Okay. There are two main, they're developed in the 20th century, two main kinds of emotion theories. Categorical theories and what I'll call, for the moment, constructivist theories. Categorical theories, I think you'll all recognize. That is, and they also, parts of them map onto common sense. That is, there's a few distinct categories of emotion, happy, sad, fear, love, and they're all sort of unrelated to each other. They're separate sets of feelings, motivations, everything. In the strong form of categorical theories, it was argued that these are hardwired neural programs. So you have a program for fear. Fear's the most obvious one, since you can probably see it farthest down the phylogenetic line. Emotions are innate. They're not learned. So people will all be, unless they have some extreme mental disability, will develop the same emotions. They'll develop a happiness, a sadness, etc. And that also means that they're culturally universal, that anywhere you go, you'll see fear, anger, sadness. And finally, part of most categorical theories is that they are recognizable by facial expressions. And that's one way that makes you believe that they must be biological. Okay, the most famous proponent of this theory was Paul Ekman, who you may have heard of, and he once was advising on a TV show called Lie to Me about recognizing lies from facial expression, which I don't think you can actually do. But his categorical theory was probably the most well recognized, and he was a big believer in facial expression as the hotline to the emotions. That's why I show a picture of him with his faces, his aspects of his face, what you look like, marked. Okay. So he proposed that there were 6 basic emotions, 6 innate, culturally universal, biologically hardwired programs that everybody was born with. And each one had a distinct facial expression. So in order, on the top row you go anger, fear, disgust, surprise, happiness, and sadness. And those were the 6. And he said that's what there is, and that's all there is. Okay, so, and I can't tell you how many studies have been done on this. For ages, whenever people, they got to looking at brain mechanisms, they would look for the 6. Are they there or not? Okay, so what's wrong with this? Okay, I should say I don't mind at all if you interrupt, even though it might not be recorded. So if you have a question, feel free. Okay, the first thing that might occur to you that's wrong with this is that there's not enough. That 6, you can all think of, what about shame? What about love? What about all sorts of things that don't fit into the 6. So that is one major criticism of this theory. Now, I should say, to be fair to categorical theorists, that many of them have responded to this by just adding more categories, right? So then you had the 9 basic emotions and the 15 basic emotions, and I think we're now up to the 25 basic emotions. at some point you think it's going to get really cumbersome when you have the 113 basic emotions or something like that. Second criticism people have made of this is that it doesn't talk at all about similarities and differences among emotions. And yet, you have the feeling that some emotions are closer to each other, like fear and hope, for example. Fear and hope, you're thinking with great uncertainty about something that might happen. But in fear, it's really something bad and you're worried about it, and hope it's something good. So they're quite close compared to, say, fear and anger, where the whole action tendency is, one is get away as fast as possible and the other is attack, or fear and happiness. And even among the 6 basic emotions Ekman studied, there's some that seem more alike and some that seem more different. So anger and disgust, not so far as, say, fear and anger, or surprise and fear, not so far as fear and anger. And in fact, I started as a graduate student, I did some work with Paul Ekman, and so those are the sort of mistakes people would make. If you were going to rate a disgust face and the right answer was supposedly disgust, the mistake you were likely to make is call it anger. And if it was surprise, the mistake you were likely to make was to call it fear. And fear and anger, fear and happiness, those mistakes didn't happen. Okay, then finally, this sort of separate programs approach doesn't tell us anything about how you move from one emotion to another. So does the fear program suddenly turn off and at the same time the anger program turns on, or what? I mean, it was just, it didn't have anything to say about that. Okay, so the main alternative that was around in the late 20th century, mid-late 20th century, was constructionist theory. And these say, no, there are not separate innate programs for emotion. Nothing is innate except physiological arousal. Everybody agrees that you feel more aroused. Your heart may beat faster, different patterns of arousal. But when you're emotional, you're more aroused than when you're neutral. And an innate positive or negative approach or withdrawal response. So that's all that's built in. Everything else comes from your perception of the situation that you're in. So you're feeling, and people did experiments like this, where they'd make you feel aroused by giving you a shot of adrenaline or something like that, and then look at how changing your situation would make you think you felt something else. And so that allows you for a potentially infinite number of emotions, which gets you out of the there's more than 6 problem, or even more than 25. So their model was usually something like this, a 2-dimensional model. So horizontally, you have going from very negative to very positive. Vertically, you have from not at all aroused to extremely aroused. And the argument was that you could put any emotion on this grid, and happy is very positive, miserable is very negative, and you have tired, very low arousal, and astonished, very high arousal. So if I think of it, so if you say, what, still there's emotions I can think of that aren't on that graph. You could say, well, you can put anything on that graph. So you think, okay, shame. Say, well, it's negative, so it's going to be over on this end of the horizontal. And say it's maybe not as aroused as distressed, but somewhere there. But whatever you think of can go there. So it does allow for a potentially infinite number of emotions. Okay. So the question is, what's wrong with this? And the criticisms of this theory set of theories were basically that it's still not differentiated enough in a way, that we have the feeling that there are more differences between, and the best example here is fear and anger, than how aroused they are and how negative they are. And if you look, let me go back to, if you look back at the negative quadrant, you'll see that afraid and angry are practically on top of each other. They're both highly aroused and negative. And so the only difference is that anger is a little bit more positive than fear. And when you think of all the differences between fear and anger, that doesn't seem to capture the whole thing. Okay, so that's the same thing. Most negative emotions are too close to each other. I mean, all the action practically is in the upper left-hand quadrant, and almost none of the action is in the lower right-hand quadrant. I mean, you can say serene, content, at ease, relaxed and calm, and you can say those are pretty damn close. That is, there are not a whole lot of different emotions down there. And some people would say tired and sleepy. I didn't think those were even emotions at all. So people were dissatisfied with that. And then the argument that it seems odd to say that anger is a high arousal negative emotion, that any emotion can be low or high arousal. So I can feel, slightly pissed at somebody, or I can feel absolutely furious rage. And they're all varieties of anger, but to place anger at a spot of a certain amount of arousal seems not to work well. And same with fear. I can feel a little bit nervous or totally panic-stricken, and so forth with all the emotions. Then the final problem, and in many ways the most difficult, is that, so you say you, after positive, negative, and arousal, it's the situation that determines what emotion you feel. What about the situation? Sort of all the questions are sort of left in this huge undeveloped category. And if you look at the research, they would do things like give you a shot of adrenaline, and then put you with a bunch of happy people or a bunch of angry people, and then ask you how you felt. And yep, you would say you were angrier when you were with angry people and happier with the happy people. But we also feel emotions sometimes when we're alone, and so a group of other people who already feel the emotion is not going to get us very far. Okay. So the last set of theories I'm going to talk about, people decided that they really wanted to, and I was one of these people, I was thinking about these theories and feeling grumpy and dissatisfied about them. And I thought, well, we really have to think about what matters for emotion. What is it about the situation or people's perception of the situation that determines what they're going to feel? And so these theories we called appraisal theories, and it was interesting because it was in the 1980s, and there were several people, some in America, some in Europe, who all developed quite similar theories. They all recognized that this was a hard question and one they wanted to look at, and developed similar theories without knowing about each other. And in fact, it was when I was first working on the first research project on this, there was a guy from Germany who came and gave a talk in my lab and presented my theory, and it was his theory. I mean, I said presented my theory. Well, that's exactly how I felt, and it was. You'll see that these theories are pretty complicated, and it was close in almost every detail. And I would say that one of the things I'm proudest about in my career is that at that point, we could have decided that we were lifelong enemies, and our whole career had to be devoted to proving why our version of this theory was better than this other practically identical theory. And having American stereotypical prejudices, I thought this is more likely because this was a German guy, and he was going to try to immediately wipe me off the face of the earth. But instead, we managed to conclude by saying, look, if two great minds like us thought of this same idea at the same time, there must be something to it. We ought to get together and advertise it. So that was great. And it worked. Okay. So the theory basically says something happens out in the outside world, an elicitor. And then the important phase for our theory is that you then appraise that. You say, what does this mean to me? And that's where the differentiation of emotions is going to come from. With this appraisal comes often a bodily response. Your heart rate speeds up or slows down. A feeling, I mean, the minute you appraise an emotionally relevant situation, you feel different, and you have some motivation to action. Okay, as I said, it's a motivation to action. You're not going to actually act. Then your culture, your family, all sorts of things come in, and they determine what happens next. So you have rules of conduct that says, this action that you're thinking of is completely inappropriate. It's going to get you into big trouble. So the actual action is controlled by rules that you've learned in your family, your culture, whatever. And likewise, on the other side, what you express, there are also rules about it. The most obvious one in our culture is that if you're a boy or a man and you feel tears coming, there's a rule that says that's not really very appropriate compared to if you were a girl or a woman. So what actually gets expressed is also going to depend on other things in the environment. Okay. Okay, then the question is, I still haven't gotten to which appraisals matter. What is it about the situation that's going to affect what emotion you feel? And so the first one, the entry point, is novelty. something in the situation changes and attracts your attention. And sometimes you immediately realize that it's not so novel. It's pretty boring. It's just the dishwasher turning on or something. And you get out of the emotional system. You say, oh, never mind. And you go back to doing what you were going to do. Okay, almost immediately, you have a sense of whether this is basically good or bad for you. You like it or you don't like it. So, not every time, but this is the next and highly likely step in the process. Okay, I'm going to go through the negative emotions first because the order is a little different. Then you may be sure of what's bad is happening or very unsure, might just think it might be bad but not know. This is a big in getting us into the domain of fear, that when you're very uncertain about what's happening, you're more likely to be afraid about the bad thing. Then, especially for negative emotions, you appraise what's causing this. So if it's something bad, and I realize that I caused it myself, then I'm going to feel ashamed or sorry or something like that. But if I think that some other person, some human being caused it to me, then I'm going to be angry. And then many bad things happen that it's not me, it's not you, it's just fate or just a combination of circumstances. Somebody died, nobody killed them, they didn't kill themselves, they were old, they were going to die. But you still feel very sad. And sadness goes with sort of controlled by the situation or fate or something that's not some human being's fault. And then another important one is how, and many people think this is the most important, how relevant is this to my goal? If I'm trying to do something, is it getting in the way or is it not? And for negative emotions, very often it's something that's thwarting your goal or getting in the way. And then finally, how much control do I have over the situation? Can I cope with it? Okay, and those are the basic appraisals that matter. On the positive side, they're the same, but agency is not so important. I mean, when something wonderful's happening, we're not that concerned with finding out whether it's great luck, whether somebody gave it to us, or whether we brought it about by ourselves. We are somewhat, it does matter, but it's not like differentiating among the negative emotions that basically we like it better in America if we brought it on ourselves, but other cultures don't feel that way. Okay, and then you don't worry so much about controlling if you're feeling basically good either. You might have a motivation to keep this going or to get more of it, but it's not like controlling the horrible thing that's happening to you. And then some theorists have added one final appraisal dimension, which certainly applies only to humans, and that is, how does this fit with the moral standards of my community, which doesn't quite map exactly onto the other ones, but whether it's entirely separate is still not everybody agrees about that. Okay, so once you get into the system, once you something novel happens. You're sort of at the gateway to the whole system. So here you see something novel has happened to these old French women. And so you can see an expression of attention in all of their faces. But you can also see, at this point, you're getting many components of emotion. You're getting heart rate decrease with attention, the orienting response, you turn and you focus towards it, and there's other physiological things that go on with that. And a certain feeling that's a subjective feeling that's different from other things. But you can see that these ladies, their attention is already showing signs of what's to come. Their faces are not all the same. So one of them seems quite ready to move into the disapproval realm, and the one in the back looks as though she might start to giggle at some point. So that you're at the threshold of further emotional development, and this will go with your appraisal of the situation. So, if you go back to the people concerned with faces, you can say, but what about those clear, coherent facial expressions that seem to signal entirely distinct emotions? The appraisal theorists would basically say the expression reflects a combination of appraisals. So you take a fear expression, and you have very high attention, as you do, in fact, in most emotions, maybe not boredom and a few things like that. It's negative, very high uncertainty, and low control. Those things all put together basically correspond to fear. So if you like the categories, you don't have to give them up altogether. And I would say that it's almost impossible to give them all up altogether, because you're growing up with a language, and the language does not favor high attention, negative, high uncertainty, and low control. It favors a word for it like fear. So anger would again be high attention and negative, strong perception that somebody else is at fault, it's other agency, and a high sense of certainty that, on second or third thought, you might start to think, was I really right to get mad at that person? But that's not likely to be your first thought in an anger situation. And for many people, anger also comes with a sense of high control, that you can do something about it. This is probably more true for men than for women, but it also, you may have heard lately people talking about, what emotions do you want to promote politically to make your political point and get people on your side. And not surprisingly to me, people are more and more thinking anger is the way to go, because people then feel powerful, they feel right, they feel justified and high in control, whereas if you make them terribly afraid, anger is, for many people, a more pleasant negative emotion than other negative emotions are. Okay, and in sadness, you have high attention and negative, but this feeling that it's not somebody's fault, you can't blame yourself, you can't blame anybody else, and a feeling of low control, inevitability, there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, so, yes, getting there. So the features of appraisal theory really are that emotion is really a process, not a state. That emotions are there's a basic kind of background, low-level emotion, and then as things change, every time you notice a change or make a different appraisal, the emotional feeling is going to change too. And it's not like a set of 6 separate pools, but more like a river that keeps flowing and changing. So, therefore, we agree with the other constructionist theories that there are not 4 or 6 or 10 basic emotions, but an infinite number. And that's not to say that some emotions aren't more salient in a culture than other emotions, especially, as I said before, if you've got a word for it. It's really reassuring to be able to name your emotion versus saying, gee, I feel sort of crummy, but I'm not sure what it's about. And if you can say, I'm anxious, I'm sad, I'm angry, then at least that gives you a little bit of control over it. Okay, similarities among emotions are going to depend on similar appraisals. So that is, you and I can see something happening and feel different emotions. Some homeless person comes and asks for money on the street. So, some people might be anxious about that. Some people might feel pity. Some people might feel angry. And that would depend on how they're appraising the same situation. So the information isn't in the situation itself, but on how you perceive it. And individuals differ in that. And cultures differ in that. So that there are some cultures where blaming other people is easily available, and anger is relatively tolerated. And our culture is, in fact, one of those. So if you talk about American culture is generally talked about as a very individualistic culture. So we believe that people, and especially us, have high agency and are responsible for things. And so you're more likely to blame somebody else if something goes wrong. Collectivistic cultures, which is many cultures, East Asian cultures, for example, the group and keeping harmony in the group is considered more important than standing out as an individual. And so their anger is heavily disapproved emotion, that it's going to disrupt the harmony no matter what. And you're showing that you're some kind of baby if you go around expressing anger and asserting your own personal private self over the group. So in those cultures, anger is less common. People may be much more likely to reject you socially if you're somebody who expresses anger, or to regard you as a kind of immature and not really worthy of a great deal of respect. Appraisals also have hypotheses. I mean, the reason I like this theory is that it generates a lot of new questions like those. And developmentally, you could argue that you're not going to be able to experience an emotion until you can make the appraisal that goes with that emotion. So with a tiny baby, when they're feeling bad, you generally see an expression of kind of generalized distress. It's bad. And they're very clear about that. But it doesn't, the differentiation between fear, anger, and just distress or sadness is not really there. At some point, and every mother can notice this very easily, they notice, they get the idea that somebody else is responsible for making them feel bad. And then anger becomes possible. I will say that having done research on this, the idea that you yourself have caused the bad thing way in the future. I mean, I tried to get little kids to, feel shame or guilt, and it wasn't until sort of first grade that they began showing a little inkling of this. So I'd say, oh, well, the mom went out of town and then outside, and the kid came along and took the dollar out of her purse. Dun, 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 dun. And so then later on, the mom comes back and she said, what happened to my dollar? I thought I had a dollar around here. Well, darling child, I know it couldn't be you because you'd never do a terrible thing like that. And you say, okay, kid, how does the kid feel? Great, I got away with it, wonderful. And so it wasn't until first grade that you started seeing kids saying, well, she feels a little bit sorry or something like that. Okay, so, and then finally you can, as I mentioned before with the East Asians and the Americans, you can have a lot of hypotheses about cultural differences in emotional experience. So there's a lot of interesting ways to go with this theory. I will say it is not the only or the winning theory out there, but there are still, Paul Ekman is still alive. There are plenty of categorical theorists and constructivist theorists. This is a constructivist theory in a way because it says emotions depend on how you interpret your situation. It just adds what things about the situation matter. Okay, that's it. Oops, thank you. It's right. Okay.
All right, we've got some time for questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, please raise your hand.
Wait, so do you believe that we can control what we perceive as positive or negative feelings?
We can control whether we perceive that it's positive or negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it takes some work, and I think it won't work for everything. So there's some positive stimuli that are pretty general across the whole species. So a very sweet taste, for example, everybody will agree on. On the other hand, a lot of other positive or negative things are learned. So there's things that are eaten in one culture that are considered disgusting in another culture, like cheese, for example. So in a sense, but then the other point is that just because it's learned doesn't mean it's controllable. So if I've learned that oysters are disgusting, I can't just decide, okay, I'm going to decide these are good. It may happen. I think almost nobody loves oysters at the age of 3, but a lot of people do when they're older. So, yes, I believe it's learn does not mean unchangeable, but it's a much harder task for me in this moment to change how I feel about something. Certainly, a lot of the therapy that deals with phobias is designed to do that, and it can succeed, but it's not going to be anything like instantaneous. Yeah, I'm not supposed to let you talk.
Hello. There is a phenomenon that I'm wondering how appraisal theory accounts for. If I think about the experience of joy, not situations that cause joy, but the very physical sensations associated with joy, the sorts of, the very feeling itself, if I think about it hard enough, I start to feel joyful. That seems to suggest that there is something going on other than appraisal that is generating the emotion, and I wonder if there is a way that
there's a lot
appraisal...
of other good examples for your point, too. I mean, many people are interested. Supposing I just smile. I'm trying to go to sleep at night, I'm anxious, and I just smile. Can I make myself feel better? And the really hard one for me, what about music? Music with no words, instrumental music, can give you a lot of emotions. On the first two, I think that, you know, our experience of emotion is consistent for much of our lives, and it happens together, so that you appraise a situation as happy, you feel happy, you smile, you're nice to people, and so forth. And after things have occurred together so often, then one bit can trigger the whole rest of it, so that the smile or the thinking of the feeling can bring on the smile part, can bring on the appraisal part. In fact, we did a study once in which we made people sad or angry or afraid over some situation, and then we would give them another ambiguous situation, and so they were already feeling angry, and in the new situation, they would be more likely to find somebody to blame for it. So that after you're grown up, then it comes as a package, and one bit can stimulate the rest. I'm still stuck on music, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, and someone up here had a question. I'm trying.
I was just wondering how much research you've done on like chains of emotions. So like, for example, like anger that covers fear or shame or something along those lines.
I'm not sure I totally get it.
Like if somebody has like an emotional reaction that is in response to another internalized emotion, for example.
Oh, so you're angry because you're feeling another emotion.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in every culture, in every family, there are also some emotions that are regarded as more desirable and more undesirable. In this culture, if you ask people, most people will tell you that pride is a really great emotion and have no problem with that. Again, in some East Asian cultures, it's regarded as childish and selfish. And so you see Olympic athletes, instead of going going over and gratefully shaking the hands of their trainer and things like that. So I think that if I feel pride in a culture like that, I may then start feeling something like shame and feeling, oh God, I mean, am I one of those undeveloped babies that is proud of myself and stuff like that? So that there are, I mean, emotions have higher or lower value too, and it can be within a family, it can be yourself even, but culture is sort of the obvious example to give.
Thank you, Dr. Ellsworth. So when you said that emotions is not it's a process and not a state, and it's like an ever-flowing river, does that mean that one is always feeling an emotion no matter what, rather than it being like there's some sort of default state that we're in when we're not feeling an emotion?
That's really an open question. I tend to feel, but now I'm talking no evidence at all, that there's some sort of very mildly emotional background. Much of the time I can be basically in a state of sort of contentment or mild interest or something like that, and then any change is going to change that. Somebody else might believe that no, there is in fact a common state of just plain neutrality. But even then you could say, I mean, I think the river image still works, because somebody may throw a pebble into me and ripples would develop, and then I would notice something, and then the process should start. But I don't know how I would go about testing whether there's a nothing state or no such thing as a nothing state. Right? It's a great question. Like the music question, the great ones are the ones where I have no idea.
Hello, and thank you for giving us
Yes.
this talk. My question is, on an individual level, are there any factors that affect the intensity of an emotion that you've learned about or researched?
Are there any
Factors that affect the intensity of an emotion that you're feeling?
I actually think that all the usual factors do, so that there are just plain individual differences, that we know people who seem, if you seem to be relatively unemotional, and people who seem to be getting wildly emotional over the least little thing. At the extremes of that, we consider them pathological, so that people who don't feel any emotion are candidates for therapy. And of course, people who are feeling wild emotions all the time are even more annoying to other people and are pushed into therapy too. And then there are cultures that encourage intensity or encourage intensity of some emotions but not others, so that in some honor-based cultures, that if you don't react with complete outrage when you think somebody has insulted somebody in your family, that's regarded as inappropriate. Whereas in some cultures, it's New England, where I come from, it's regarded as childish to overreact to things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm intrigued by some aspects of the appraisal method, and if you could expound a little bit more about the goal relevance and effort aspects.
Okay.
And particularly, I'm thinking of an individual level, interpersonal level, in which you have two people who essentially have different subjective perspectives and different goals, trying to cooperate.
Right. So if I have a goal, if I'm working on a goal, then anything relevant to that goal is going to be noticed and sort of probably tend to dominate the emotional experience. If two people are working on the same project and have
Or
different,
in a relationship with each other.
are their relationship? Okay, well, you know, obviously the question is, are their goals incompatible?
Yes.
If so, they're going to notice that quite quickly. And but the hard part is that what you'll notice is that something's wrong,
Yeah.
that you're getting irritated with each other for reasons that the other one doesn't understand, and so forth. And to get from that to identifying the problem, that in fact it's because you have different goals, is very difficult. So,
But that's where conversation comes in to educate each other, wouldn't you say? And then agency adjusts in order to accept the possibility of difference.
yes, I think that
Yeah.
probably once you've identified the fact that you actually have different goals, then you're a lot closer to being able to improve the situation than when you're just getting frustrated and irritated all the time, and you don't realize what it is. You think the other person is failing to meet your goal, when in fact the problem is they don't even care very much about your goal. Which is worse, who knows? But it's better to identify the problem correctly, I think.
Yeah, and I know you talked also about then what do you do? There's some instrumental behavior that you do differently when you have that awareness.
Right. I mean,
That might mean a change in the goal, or at least adjusting your level of agency over
right. Yes,
the
certainly.
outcome.
Sometimes you might have to change a goal. I mean, when something's going really wrong, your first move is to try to change the situation. But when that's not possible, then you have to start changing your feelings about it, your appraisals of it, or leave the situation. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm wondering what appraisal theorists might make of emotional contagion, whether someone else's experience of an emotion, or expression rather, provides information about what appraisals in the environment are appropriate, or whether there's just other social functions that emotional contagion plays. What would you make of it?
I don't think that appraisal theorists have thought very much about it, but yes, I think it gives you information on how people appraise the situation, and how, and if there are many people that may make you appraise the situation in the same way. I'm going to need to sit down. What? What? No.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate you so much.